It's 1994 and you're enjoying a brand new mainline Sonic game from Sonic Team that cost you the best part of £60 in the UK or $70 dues in the US. It's a total classic, albeit it has less levels than both the previous Sonic games. And then, from out of nowhere comes another one. Smashing into your wallet like some sort of angry, misled echidna comes Sonic & Knuckles, a sequel to Sonic the Hedgehog 3 coming just 8 months later. It comes in the form of a pass-through cartridge that allows you to plug in your older Sonic games with enhancements, the headline combination being that of Sonic the Hedgehog 3 and Knuckles, giving you a huge experience from start to finish. But sold as a standalone, did the game actually deliver? Was it a total classic like the previous game, or just very expensive DLC? On the 30th anniversary of Sonic & Knuckles, let's take a look. Before we get into it, just something to note. As always, the footage you see here was captured via real hardware, and in my case via an OSSC. However, in order to make sure I got all the footage that I needed, I captured from my original PAL Sonic & Knuckles cartridge on its own and with my childhood copy of Sonic 3 locked in, the Sonic 3 Complete ROM hack at 60Hz, and Sonic Jam on the Sega Saturn. Just putting that out there for all you eagle-eyed ones who might spot the odd little visual difference between the versions. And of course, just to clarify, I know that downloadable content wasn't really a thing back in 1994 when Sonic & Knuckles released, but the concept of an expansion pack was well established, so whenever I use that modern term of DLC, that's essentially what I'm referring to. Though of course, the Xbox 360 downloadable version was DLC in the very purest sense. Anyway, let's go. The hype around Sonic the Hedgehog 3 was palpable. This was a game 15 months removed from the previous entry, where Sonic Mania had been at fever pitch. As such, there was an abundance of preview and marketing material around Sonic Team's third mainline Sonic outing. Sonic & Knuckles had comparatively little hype, where Sonic the Hedgehog 3 got huge 6-page reveals and previews. For the most part, Sonic & Knuckles received only snippets of news articles at first, some even incorrectly calling it Sonic the Hedgehog 4. Even when there were lengthy previews, they were shorter and less enthusiastic than those for Sonic 3. There's a few reasons for this. Firstly, the announcement had come just half a year removed from Sonic the Hedgehog 3's launch, so Sonic fans hadn't really had a chance to miss Sonic at that point. There's also the argument that Sonic had already peaked, with the launch of Sonic 3 not quite reaching the heights of Sonic 2, so there may have been some serious fatigue by then. It wasn't as if Sonic had been in absentia between Sonic 2 and 3 either, with not one but 2 cartoon shows, as well as the launches of 2 separate comics, as well as video games released in a period including Sonic Spinball, Sonic Chaos and Sonic CD in 1993. So the fatigue from the games media and the general public as the series' third flagship entry came and went may have genuinely been a factor. Still, SNK got a number of cover stories and previews in its own right, mostly from September until the games released the very next month. There's no prototype rocking the Sonic 2 sprite in previews here. This was a far less protracted journey from announcement to release because of the game's somewhat unique development process at the time. As I explained in my Sonic 3 video, both it and Sonic & Knuckles were originally one game, but when deadlines, cartridge sizes and McDonald's promotions put a squeeze on Sonic Team's ambitious project, it was split in two. This rumour did surface in a couple of magazines, but largely went unreported at the time. Murmurs did resurface when Sonic 3's cheat code did the rounds and its level select revealed the Flying Battery, Mushroom Valley and Sandopolis zones, but given the abundance of dropped zones from Sonic 2 and the semi-playable Hidden Palace zone within that game, these were mostly just assumed to be leftovers of abandoned stages. When Sonic & Knuckles began doing the preview rounds, Sega were very keen to position it as a brand new standalone game, and the next entry in the series. Interestingly, it would be Mean Machine Sega, who previously reported that the game would be split in two, that would pick up on this entry, effectively being Sonic 3 Part 2, though they don't go the whole hog, so to speak. Rather, they link it back to the original report of Sonic the Hedgehog 3 being split in two. They call out the rumoured combined cartridge, but then they just toe the Sega party line and that this is a whole new game with extras. So what were those extras?
this backwards compatibility.
The nature of the pass-through cartridge slot at the top of Sonic & Knuckles was one of its biggest selling points. Plugging Sonic 2 into that slot would allow you to play as Knuckles in Sonic's first mainline sequel. You do the same with Sonic 1 and you get access to the Blue Sphere minigame based on Sonic 3 special stages, whilst plugging it into most other Sega Genesis or Mega Drive games yields a single random Blue Sphere stage. But the headline act was plugging Sonic 3 into the top of the cartridge, turning Sonic 3 into Sonic 3 and Knuckles. You can play both games as one combined experience, including playing as Knuckles in Sonic 3 stages. You retain access to the multiplayer mode. There are now 14 special stages to complete, adding the Super Emeralds to the game's story and allowing both Knuckles and Tails to achieve their super forms. Sonic 3 and Knuckles is the game that Sonic Team originally envisioned. It is, of course, the game that was later released in full on PC and then was later included as the sole Sonic 3 experience on Sonic Origins Collection, eschewing the ability to play the two halves of the game separately. Sonic & Knuckles lock-on technology was certainly innovative and exciting. But let's rewind. Sega pushed this as a full game, commanding a full £45 price tag here in the UK. In my Sonic 3 video, I judged that Sonic 3 to be a complete classic on its own terms, a game that was epic and fully featured. The question is, did Sonic & Knuckles stand up as a classic without relying on its lock-on feature? Plug the cart in alone and you get this very nicely rendered title screen. I always found this more impressive than Sonic the Hedgehog 3's. There's more going on, you have two characters, and Sonic's model just looks better in this version than his weird Sonic 1 approximation in the previous game. Unlike the previous two 16-bit titles, you don't have a menu. Instead, you are presented with a choice, Sonic or Knuckles. The font used here is interesting and flashy, and the little chibi characters next to the selection are a nice touch, but it's a bit of a distraction. There's no options mode, and there's no competition or two-player mode like the previous two games. Select your character and you're launched straight into the game. Unlike Sonic 3, there's no save function. Almost immediately, the downgrades from the previous game are apparent. Add to that the fact that Tails has suddenly gone missing between Sonic 3 and Sonic & Knuckles, and as a package, the first impressions aren't great. If you choose Sonic, it can continue to feel a little bit underwhelming. Sonic starts out stationary as the act card for the first level fades, which is in line with the first two 16-bit games, but a significant step down from the cinematic opening of Sonic the Hedgehog 3. Start as Knuckles though, and you do get a nice little cinematic to start you off, with Knuckles being attacked by an egg robo and giving chase. The opening zone itself is a good introduction to the game. Mushroom Hill is a huge and varied zone with tons of features. The fact that it shifts through different seasons as you traverse it is a lovely visual touch and adds variety, even if it is just superficial. That said, it doesn't feel like a traditional Sonic opener. It lacks the lush greenery and seaside feel of the previous games in the trilogy, and that's understandable since in reality you wouldn't want to have a stage similar to Angel Island in what is essentially the same game. But then that's the issue. It's a great zone, but it does feel distinctly like the middle chapter rather than the opening act, because it is. The pulleys, the springboards and the swings have more in common thematically with something like Hilltop Zone, Mystic Cave or Marble Garden. The clue is of course in the name. The change from Mushroom Valley, likely its original designation as a middle stage, to Mushroom Hill, which sounds thematically similar to Green Hill and Emerald Hill, is evidence of its repurposing. Of course, the game itself plays as well as Sonic has ever done. Sonic has the same number of moves and controls as Sonic 3, so it's just more of the same basically, and I don't mean that as a bad thing. Knuckles meanwhile can climb and glide, and those abilities open levels up in new ways, while his ability to smash through some walls reveals different paths. Stage design can differ greatly between the two characters, making the Knuckles campaign different enough to be considered an additional experience, rather than the same one with a character swap as was the case in the previous games. The next 3 zones continue to follow the pattern set by Sonic 3. 2 acts per zone, a minor boss at the end of Act 1, a small change in music and visuals for Act 2, culminating in a major boss fight. Flying Battery, following Mushroom Hill, is basically a heavy metal winged fortress from Sonic 2 with false animal cages and traps galore. Sandopolis starts off in desert ruins, But after defeating its guardian, our heroes enter a pyramid itself, which is filled with ghosts that can be warded off by illuminating the area. Interestingly, Sonic sets the ghosts free while they're already loose in Knuckles' story, which takes place after. They're great zones, but my personal favourite is Lava Reef, taking place inside an active volcano to a thumping soundtrack. At the end of Act 1, a battle with a giant robotic hand ensues, and when that is defeated, the volcano cools and a vastly different audio and visual setting ensues for Act 2. And this is when Sonic & Knuckles goes from being just another Sonic game to something that has the makings of a classic. At the end of Lava Reef Act 2, Sonic and Knuckles' paths diverge. Sonic is sent into the heart of the volcano by Knuckles, who is, in his story, still working for Robotnik. There, the Death Egg lights up the lava again and Sonic engages in one of the lengthiest and most spectacular boss sequences in any of the games so far. Knuckles, meanwhile, simply walks into the next act with no boss battle, creating a clear delineation between the two campaigns. It's also where both stories kick into high gear, and the stage format that the previous 4 zones and those of Sonic 3 stuck to so rigidly fades away. Both characters enter the next single act stage, Hidden Palace. In Sonic 3, one of the great additions was the inclusion of more cutscenes. These short moments in gameplay demonstrated the interplay between Sonic and Knuckles and were great for exhibiting the level transitions. Sonic & Knuckles takes this up a notch, especially from this point forward. Hidden Palace sees Sonic and Knuckles go head to head as the red threaded one guards the Master Emerald from his blue rival. However, it's here that Dr. Robotnik shows his true hand, and while the spiky rodents duel, he makes his play for the Master Emerald. It's a great sequence, all done with sprites in gameplay with no voice acting, but the moment is translated almost perfectly. The betrayal, the emotion, and Knuckles' redemption. This builds to the Sky Sanctuary zone, where the Death Egg rises as a beaten Knuckles helps Sonic race after it, whereby Mecha Sonic in Robotnik's Eggmobile will battle Sonic a couple of times before taking him on one-on-one. When Sonic is finally victorious, he leaps to the Death Egg while Mecha Sonic slumps to defeat as the Sky Sanctuary crumbles around him. In Knuckles' story, meanwhile, Mecha Sonic acts as the final boss, destroying the Egg Robo that harried Knuckles throughout his adventure and eventually powering himself up via the Master Emerald. It acts as a different but satisfying conclusion to the different path that Knuckles walks. Sonic, meanwhile, battles through the imposing Death Egg Zone, a gargantuan stage that likely reflects the original ambitions for the zone in Sonic the Hedgehog 2, combating multiple bosses through the zone's massive acts, culminating in this gigantic mecha and then chasing Robotnik as he attempts to flee with the Master Emerald. This leads onto the Doomsday Zone, a zone only available to Sonic when he has collected all of the Chaos Emeralds. Transforming into Super Sonic, he then gives chase to Eggman in his 2 getaway craft. Destroy both, and it's game over. The Doomsday Zone is important as it set the template for future games to follow. Perfect Chaos in Sonic Adventure, the final hazard in its sequel, Metal Overlord in Sonic Heroes, and so many more. This adrenaline-filled, super-powered, high-speed boss battle would serve as a transition between classic Sonic and modern Sonic. In fact, it could be argued that this applies to Sonic and Knuckles in totality, with a focus on levels that had more set pieces than traditional level design at times, multiple characters that offered differing gameplay experiences, multi-button special moves and attacks, a focus on cutscenes and in-game cinematics, and a final boss that was more about spectacle than precision. It's why Sonic Adventure felt like a natural progression to me. Sonic still felt like Sonic, but in 3D, but that may be a discussion for another day. Overall, both characters offer an outstanding experience for players, arguably one that's higher on spectacle but maybe less fulfilling from a gameplay perspective. You see, Sonic & Knuckles is a bit on the easy side. You may not be able to save your game like in Sonic 3 in its standalone state, but it's certainly easier than the likes of Sonic the Hedgehog 1 and 2. There's a few reasons for this. The level design itself isn't especially challenging. Shields often make stages a cakewalk, like the fire shield that appears in Lava Reef so often, protecting you from projectiles and fire. And as spectacular as they are, the bosses are also quite often pushovers, at least until you get to the Death Egg Zone. But It's the way that the special and bonus stages are set up that really make this game a bit of a breeze. Special stage rings, for example, are in abundance. There's 7 for Sonic in Mushroom Hill and a whopping 9 for Knuckles, meaning you could conceivably collect all of the emeralds in the first zone and banking a cool 50 rings every time you encounter a special zone ring thereafter. That, admittedly, would take a fair bit of exploration and practice. The same can't really be said for the bonus stages, of which there are 2. The first is a casino night style slot machine that lets you gamble for more rings if you hit the star post with more than 20 rings. If you hit one with more than 30 odd rings, however, you get this vertically scrolling stage where you climb up the top via these gravity balls. The higher you get, the greater the rewards, starting from shields and 10 ring pickups to extra lives and 70 ring pickups at the top. Getting to the top of these is pretty easy, and that means that quite often you'll get the chance to grab up to 3 extra lives every time you hit a star post. Combine the ability to bank tons of lives with stages that feel a little more forgiving than Sonic 3's launch base zone, and the game becomes something of a walk in the park. And if you lock on Sonic 3, you get a save function too, which makes it even easier. That was my first experience of it. Sonic the Hedgehog 3 took me quite a few weeks to get through, Sonic 1 and 2 a number of months. With Sonic and Knuckles, I was done in less than a week in 1994. Yes, you get a second campaign with Knuckles and the lock-on capabilities are great, but as a standalone experience, it's arguably Sonic's shortest and easiest on the console. So where does that leave Sonic and Knuckles as a standalone title? Whereas Sonic the Hedgehog 3 gave us completely new audio and visual experience that was fully featured with multiplayer options and a save function, Sonic and Knuckles feels a little lacking by comparison. The opening stage is a little underwhelming, there's no competition mode or even co-op given Tails' absence, and there's no save function by default. The design decisions produce an experience that's easier than prior Sonic games, and the sound and visual design are identical to Sonic the Hedgehog 3, with none of the shifts in style that you would see moving through the previous trilogy of games. But, and this is a big but, Sonic and Knuckles drives the series forward in other ways. The more cinematic set pieces and cutscenes, the epic finale, the DNA of this game is felt in nearly every Sonic game that came after. And it's still a better platformer than almost any other in the genre that generation that didn't star Sonic, Mario or Ristar, or Donkey Kong I guess if you enjoy pre-rendered visuals and garbage level design. But anyway, Sonic and Knuckles is a great game. You can certainly argue that in comparison to other £40 platformers of the time, it's in the top tier. However, unless it's connected to Sonic the Hedgehog 3, you're still missing features. The Mushroom Hill transition, Hypersonic, Super Tails, Hyper Knuckles, the Super Emeralds. I mean, for crying out loud, locking on to Sonic the Hedgehog 3 gives you 2 additional save slots that now track your lives and continues, which shows that it does have save capacity, it just locks it behind Sonic the Hedgehog 3. You can't even get the full ending with the solo Sonic and Knuckles experience, with Super Sonic reverting to Sonic's normal form sooner, a missing scene when the floating island rises, and even post-credits you get this tease that works like, hey, you want the full ending? Buy the main game, you cheapskate. So if you paid £45 in 1994, you were getting what was a great standalone game, but you weren't getting the full experience unless you already had Sonic 3. Sonic and Knuckles could be seen as either a great standalone game or expensive DLC, but when that DLC gives you a full game's worth of extra content, it's arguable that the price is actually worth it. In fact, Sonic and Knuckles' lock-on nature enhanced more than the base Sonic 3 game, and the 3 and Knuckles experience ends up to be more than the sum of its parts. Stories being split into 2 games would continue to appear, from Sega's own Clockwork Knight to cliffhanger endings in both Halo 2 and God of War 2 that both gave us sequels with shorter runtimes. Even today, Sony's plans for a third Spider-Man game propose that it is split into 2 parts. So, on its own terms, Sonic & Knuckles is a great, if not classic experience. It's still one of the greatest platformers of its era, but as a standalone, it's best considered as a curio rather than the best way to play. It only becomes whole when paired with Sonic the Hedgehog 3, and for that reason, while it is good as a standalone game, it really is primarily expensive DLC, but in that respect, it's damn good additional content, arguably the greatest game enhancement ever. But what do you all think? What are your memories of Sonic and Knuckles? Let us know in the comments below, or join the discussion on the Sega Guys Discord. If you've enjoyed the video, please give us a like and subscribe, as that really helps the channel, and hit that bell for notifications to keep on top of all future Sega Guys content, including our fortnightly podcast. And if you want to be extra mega, think about becoming a member with a bunch of awesome perks from as little as 99p. But regardless of any of that, thank you so much for staying with us and watching, and we will see you on the Sega side.